In this video, I'll walk you through the steps to finish up the Sable Sweater. This is the second video in a two-part series. The last video I covered the basics on starting a sweater in the round, how to cast on, place stitch markers, and work in creases to shape the sleeves and the body. So if you haven't already, go watch that video to get all caught up, and purchase the Sable Sweater pattern on my Etsy to follow along, and let's pick up where we left off, just about to separate the sleeves from the body. Once you have the correct number of stitches for your body and sleeves, I like to just double check to make sure that I've reached the correct amount of stitches on my sleeve before I start separating. That to me is the easiest way to indicate that I've reached the right row. Of course, you could also count the number of rows and that sort of thing, but what I typically like to do is just go and count the stitches that are available on my sleeve just to double check to make sure that I've reached the point where I'll continue and separate the sleeves and the body. I will knit until my third stitch marker, and then I have this circular pair of needles right here, and I'm going to slip my stitches from my sleeve onto a spare pair of needles. And to do this, really, it's just as simple as just taking it and slipping. And we want to insert the needle from behind and slip it over because we don't want to twist our stitches. So what you want to do is just, because we're not knitting them, we're just slipping them over. So we want to make sure that they're in the correct position. And if you, for example, slipped from the front to back, you could end up twisting your stitches, which won't provide a very nice look as you continue to knit. And then I will be slipping all the stitches until the next stitch marker. So just before we reach our front body. So now you have your stitches on this pair of needles. And what you will need to do is now join the back and the front. So the stitches that are on my right needle now are from the back, and the ones on my left are of the front of the garment. So now we need to cast on some stitches and join this in the round, because now what we'll be doing is knitting the body panel on the pair of needles that I'm working on right now. So what I like to do to cast on, very simple, is just bring the yarn in my fingers, and as if I were going to do a long tail cast on. Now you can see that the stitches from the front and back side are still separate. What we need to do is join these in the round. So all we need to do here is insert our right needle and knit the first stitch, pulling tightly so that there aren't any gaps in our work. Then you just continue knitting, and as you go around, you can remove all of your stitch markers, or you can choose to keep them if you like having that visual aid. Just remember that you won't be working any increases anymore. So as you can see, our body is now joined underneath our sleeve. So here are our sleeve stitches that we slipped onto the other needle, the spare needle that I have. And then I cast on a couple of stitches and then just continued knitting across the front. And now we have now joined the front and back. And we'll do the same on the other side for the other sleeve. And then we'll just continue working the body. As you continue knitting, keep track of how many rows you're working. The best part about knitting from the top down is that it makes it so much easier to customize the length of your piece. This time around, I'm going for a crop version of the sweater, so I made sure to try it on and get a better idea of how many more rows I needed to work before I switched to the ribbing. From there, I just continued on with some mindless knitting until I was ready to switch out my needles from size 12 to size 10mm US 15 needles. So you can see that I have the shortest cable that I have on my 12mm needles. You'll find that this cord is still going to be much larger than the sleeve that you're going to be working with, but you know, work with what you have and it should all be all right. I'll show you, I'll be demonstrating how I work around that extra cable as well.
All you need to do next is pick up the stitches you left on your spare needle, slipping them as I demonstrated before, and being careful not to twist your stitches in the process.
Okay, so I've picked up all of my stitches along the sleeve, and what I need to do is pick up additional stitches that aren't already available on the bottom underside of my armpit. And to do this, we're going to be taking our working yarn. So after you finish the body, you should have your working yarn ready to go, holding it in 2 strands again throughout the entire piece. I'm just going to move my cord around so that I have enough flexibility to work. And I'm going to pick up my right needle. I'm going to identify these little V's right here. They're the upside down V's. See those right there? For example, I'm looking at this one in particular. So this one right here. I'm going to insert my right needle into that upside down V shape. And then I'm going to take my working yarn and make sure that there's a little tail. You don't want your work to come undone. And then just place that loop on top of the needle and pull your needle back through. So I'm going to pick up stitches here. The number is specified in the pattern. I'm doing an adjustment because of the difference in my yarn that I'm working with and what's recommended in the pattern. But then I just picked up those stitches, and then I have a stitch marker that I'm going to place, and this is going to mark the beginning of the round.
So as you can see here, since my cord is larger than my sleeve opening, I have to adjust by moving my stitches around the cable as I work. You could also use double pointed needles here to avoid this, but in my opinion, the best solution is what you already have at home on hand, so I'm working with the needles that I have. While working on this video, I had to deal with a yarn shortage not once but twice. I realized as I was working on my right sleeve that I had to order more skeins because even though this time around I went for a more cropped look, I used double the amount of skeins than normally called for in the pattern. So this is partly just a miscalculation on my side, but my biggest takeaway from using Drop's Wish is that it doesn't go far at all, especially when working in 2 strands. So that's definitely something to keep in mind in case you want to use this yarn for a future project or even this sweater. So I started out with 5 skeins of this yarn to complete this project, and in the end I used 9 skeins. But with the last delivery of these 2 skeins, I was ready to finish off the sleeves. So once the sleeves are reaching a length that you're happy with, knit 2 together across the round before working one last knit row, and then cast off all stitches. For the last step of the Sable Sweater pattern, we need a crochet hook and our working yarn. What we need to do is secure the collar by working slip stitches at the very base of the neck ribbing. This step is completely optional, but I highly recommend you take the time to do this because it will help prevent the neckline from stretching out over time. One of the first videos I shared on YouTube covered this technique, so go check that out for more detailed instructions. And finally, as my own personal little touch, I really like to take the time to sew in personalized tags into all of my handmade garments. For me, it's just something that makes my pieces feel a little bit more professional and makes me excited to wear them even more. As you can see here, I was so excited to finish up this sweater. I'm so happy with how it turned out, better than I could have imagined actually. But I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you enjoyed making this sable sweater as well. If you do make this sweater, please be sure to tag me on Instagram, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.